I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey Lurkers, welcome to episode 49. I wanted to start out by apologizing for not having an episode last week. It was kind of a last minute decision. It just got to the point where I had to take a week off, regroup, work on some research so that I can sit and record several episodes at once. I really want to work on bringing on some guest co-hosts. Angeline and I have been talking about doing an episode on Travis Walton for, a couple months now. Neither one of us have finished reading the book. So I want to bring her back. My brother's interested in doing some episodes with me. There are people who want to come on. I record whenever I have the time to record, and I'm recording for the week of. So I want to get out of that. But anyway, you all don't really care about all that stuff. You just want to hear me talk about what we're going to talk about today. So without any other nonsense, let's get to today's topic. So as promised, today is all about witchcraft, murder, and ghosts surrounding the murder of Nelson Rehmeyer in an area of Pennsylvania known as Rehmeyer's Hollow or Hex Hollow. This location is actually not very far from my house. It is a pretty interesting case. It took place in York County, Pennsylvania. I actually, because it's so close, was able to go find the house, and I recorded a couple of EVPs that I am going to play for you near the end of the episode. Thanks to my husband, who agreed to go ride along when I went to go find this house. So before we get into the meat of the story, we'll need to first take a look at something called browkery or powwow. Now this is where the witchcraft kind of comes in. Not that powwowing is witchcraft, but you're going to figure that out. It is still considered, it's not witchcraft. But witchcraft plays a role in here, right? There is witchcraft. Powwow is a type of folk magic that originated from the culture of the Pennsylvania Dutch, who immigrated from Germany. It includes a wide range of healing rituals that is used primarily for treating ailments in humans and livestock. It is also used to secure physical and spiritual protection and good luck in everyday activities. Powwow is probably a word that you associate more with Native Americans than with the Pennsylvania Dutch. It was actually borrowed from the Algonquin language by 17th century missionaries. The word powwow was known to describe a healer, and it was derived from a verb implying trance or dreaming for divination or healing purposes. The term was applied to the Pennsylvania Dutch because of a perceived similarity in the ritual healing aspect. So it was taken from the Native Americans, it was appropriated from their language, and used to describe this type of healing. In German, it's called braucherei, not powwow. Powwow is just a little easier to say. So in powwow, the Bible is considered to be the most important book, and practitioners would work with the Bible in hand. There were also several other grimoires, which a grimoire is basically like a book of spells. So there were several others that were used in this practice. There were a few popular books: Romanus Buchlein, The Egyptian Secrets of Albertus Magnus, and John Homan's Long Lost Friend. Other than the Bible, the Long Lost Friend was the most common source of powwowing incantations. The book itself could serve as a talisman for the person possessing it. A snippet of the long-lost friend reads, "Whoever carries this book with him is safe from all his enemies, visible or invisible, and whoever has this book with him cannot die without the holy corpse of Jesus Christ, nor drowned in any water, nor burn up in any fire, nor can any unjust sentence be passed upon him. So help me." Some examples of remedies that were found in the long-lost friend include the remedy for someone who cannot keep their water. You burn a hog's bladder to powder and then take it inwardly. I'd rather lose my water. I'm not eating powdered pig bladder. Sorry. For stopping bleeding, specifically stopping it on the day when the injury happened, you say, "Blood, thou must stop until the Virgin Mary bring forth another son." And you repeat these words 3 times. That will apparently stop the bleeding. To extinguish a fire without water, you write these words on each side of a plate and throw it into the fire, and it will extinguish henceforth. Sator arepo tenet opera rotus. Powwow is also used to cure things like warts and burns. It is used to prevent theft or to compel a thief to return stolen goods. And it's used to protect homes and people from harm. Many times, protection spells are written on paper, folded a specific way, and carried in the person's pocket or in some type of amulet bag worn around the neck. Some books say that the practitioner should have common sense and be respected and loved by all. They must be 30 years old and believe in the Holy Bible. Have a strong constitution, because the healer receives the sickness of the patient in his or her own body and can be weakened by the sickness. Which makes me think of the movie The Green Mile, also the book. Read the book, it's better. The movie was good. Where the inmate takes on the illness and belches out the flies. It's good. Trust me. Watch it. No money can be charged for powwowing, though a voluntary payment or offering from the patient is acceptable to take. The way powwowing is learned is crossways, and that basically means that a man teaches a woman and a woman teaches a man. Those who break the rules by teaching a person of the same sex will lose their powers and be as weak as any other mortal. But there are ways around this rule, like if, specifically it said this, if a man explains to a desk while another man might be sitting there and by chance writing a letter, listening to the explanation, or if a woman tells a piano the practice of powwow and there's another woman nearby listening, that's acceptable. So if you just decide to tell various inanimate objects how to powwow and somebody just happens to be listening that's the same sex as you, you're good. Otherwise, you can't teach anybody from the same sex. It's important to note that faith is stressed as the reason that a person is cured. If a cure does not happen after a certain amount of time, the powwow doctor stops treatment because obviously the patient lacks faith. Here's where we're going to mention the witchcraft angle of things. If you think about it, it wouldn't be a huge stretch for somebody to maybe take this to a different level. So on the flip side of powwow or brauchery is hexery, which is the German word for witchcraft. And I'm not talking about Wicca. Wicca is completely, as long as you don't harm anybody, you're good. And if it harm none, do what you will. No problem with Wicca. I'm talking about the dark sort of witchcraft. The dark arts, black magic, that sort of thing. So there were also people who were dabbling in that, doing things like cursing people. Basically, the difference between the two here, it comes down to intent. A powwower is doing things for good reasons. They only do something to help another person. Whereas hexery has more to do with harm or helping oneself. And now that brings us to John Blymeyer. John Blymeyer was born December 27th, 1894, to Emmanuel and Margaret Blymeyer in York County, Pennsylvania. His family and neighbors were primarily farmers and descendants of early German settlers. Blymeyer was born into a family of witches. His father and grandfather were both skilled in powwowing. Young John was said to have inherited their ability. He absorbed the knowledge about powwow medicine from his family, and at the age of 7, reportedly tried his first cure, curing his grandfather of a difficulty urinating. At age 10, he allegedly went to work for a neighboring farmer named Nelson Rehmeyer, who was a potato farmer, and John earned 25 cents per day. There's also some information that says that John Blymeyer's family took him to Nelson Rehmeyer to be cured, because Nelson Rehmeyer was also a powwow doctor. But I've also seen other information that did not happen, that he was never taken there to be treated by Nelson Rehmeyer. I don't know. Throwing it out there. Maybe he was treated by Nelson, probably not. As John Blymeyer got older, he had a moderate success as a powwow practitioner. He was described as a dull boy with limited intelligence. Some sources say that he was on the border between a low normal and delayed mental capacity. I'm not sure about that. There are some things about John Blymeyer that you're going to learn here that make me wonder about his mental capacity. So in 1908, at the age of 13, Blymeyer left school and took a job at a cigar factory in York. His mother actually said that John Blymeyer's father drove him away from the home at the age of 13, and that he was not mentally sound. Blymeyer lived in a series of rooming houses and kept to himself, but word got around that he could heal. He had a co-worker who had a wheal in his eye. A wheal in the eye is basically a welt or a swollen area. And he went to John Blymeyer to be healed. Blymeyer told his co-worker, Albert Wagner, to bring a dirty supper plate to work, which Wagner did the next day. Blymeyer pressed the dirty side against the inflamed eye while he muttered something unintelligible. Then he threw the plate to the ground and stomped it to pieces. Blymeyer made the sign of the cross 3 times on Wagner's eye and said it would be better the next day. To Wagner's astonishment, the eye was healed when he woke up the next morning. Other people began seeking out Blymeyer with their health problems. He charged no fees, but did accept whatever voluntary offerings his clients wanted to give him. In the summer of 1912, John Blymeyer and his co-workers headed out onto the streets of York at quitting time. Suddenly they heard someone screaming about a mad dog. There was a rabid collie foaming at the mouth, charging straight for Blymeyer and some co-workers. Everyone rushed to get back into the factory, but they were blocked by the men who were coming out. Blymeyer put himself in front of the collie, murmured an incantation, and made the sign of the cross over the collie's head. The dog stopped foaming at the mouth and seemed to be miraculously cured of rabies. John Blymeyer patted the collie's head, and the dog licked his hand and followed him down the street, wagging its tail. This incident should have clinched Blymeyer's fame as a powwower, but instead, he fell into poor health and financial ruin. He began suffering from apnema, a wasting away of the body caused by an evil hex, but most likely caused by malnutrition. Blymeyer lost his appetite and he couldn't sleep. He was already thin, and he ended up losing even more weight and became convinced that someone had put a hex on him, possibly a jealous competitor who didn't want him to become too popular as a powwower. According to Pennsylvania Dutch belief, a hex cannot be removed until the identity of the one who cast the hex is discovered. Neither Bleimeyer's father nor his grandfather were able to learn who the hexer was to break the spell. Bleimeyer consulted other witches and spent his small amount of pay to find out, but he failed to get rid of the hex. The longer he went unable to break the curse, the more obsessed he became with it. In the winter of 1913, right before he turned 18, John Bleimeyer quit his job at the cigar factory in order to devote more time to breaking the hex. He moved from rooming house to rooming house, making a small living with his powwowing and odd jobs as a janitor, busboy, and assistant to the sexton in a Presbyterian church. He spent all his money on voluntary offerings to other witches, some of whom allegedly took him for hundreds of dollars before giving up. By the time he was 19, Bleimeyer was a wreck. He weighed less than 100 pounds and suffered from both real and imagined illnesses and nearly constant headaches. Then, at one of the rooming houses, John Bleimeyer met and fell in love with Lily Holloway, the landlord's 17-year-old daughter. The two married in 1917, and John Bleimeyer saw an improvement in his health. He gained weight, got a steady job, and his powwow clients increased. It's amazing what love can do. But when their first child, a son, was born and then died within 5 weeks, and then their second child was born prematurely and lived only 3 days, Bleimeyer became convinced the hex was back. His health once again declined, the headaches returned, and he lost his job. He vowed he would not stop until he discovered who the unknown hexer was and removed the curse. By 1920, John Bleimeyer had seen 20 witches, but none were able to help him. One of the witches he consulted was Andrew Lenhart, who was said to be a powerful witch that even the local police steered clear of. And by witch here, I mean bad witch, obviously. Lenhart was known to advise his clients to take violent actions in order to break spells cast by their enemies. One of Lenhart's clients actually murdered their spouse because of things Lenhart told them about being hexed. Lenhart told Bleimeyer that he had been hexed by someone very close to him. John Bleimeyer was half out of his mind at this point, and he immediately suspected his wife of hexing him. His wife Lily started to fear for her life, and her father hired a lawyer and was able to get Bleimeyer examined by a psychiatrist, who diagnosed him as borderline psychoneurotic and had John Bleimeyer committed to the state mental hospital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Basically, Bleimeyer was diagnosed with borderline personality, which is what it's called today. After 48 days at the hospital, John Bleimeyer escaped during a baseball game on the grounds. There was a search, but not a very good one. And because of a rule stating that after a patient goes missing for 100 days from the time of their delivery date or committal date, they are considered discharged. Bleimeyer walked all the way home to York, and no one made an effort to have him recommitted. His wife was able to obtain a divorce. Bleimeyer once again started living in rooming houses and continued his powwowing. He began using the name John Albright in his powwow dealings. He apparently sought to obtain property and land from his powwow clients and managed to convince one old farmer to sign over 5 to 10 acres to him. Bleimeyer forged a note for $600 and insisted that the farmer had to pay the note or he would need to deed the farm to Bleimeyer. The farmer was easily persuaded. The first judge they went to refused to allow the transaction, but they eventually found a justice of the peace who put it through. Luckily, the farmer's family hired an attorney who was able to get the transaction annulled, and the property was returned to the farmer. So it's important to note here, if John Bleimeyer has limited mental capacity as far as intelligence, how is he able to con so easily? That's my question throughout this. And this information I gathered from actual newspaper articles during the time. I love reading old newspapers. They tell you everything. You had no secrets. It was the Facebook of the everything was in the paper. So he did this. He conned this farmer, this old farmer, out of his land. If you have limited mental capacity, limited intelligence, how are you able to do that? So during this time, the majority of Bleimeyer's powwow clients were women. It was also reported that he showed a 14-year-old boy naked photos of women. The police said while there was no crime committed in that, it did speak to his moral turpitude. Pretty sure it's a crime now. In 1928, Bleimeyer went back to work at the cigar factory in York, and there he met 14-year-old John Curry. John Curry started out life in a loving family. He was close to his dad, but at the age of 5, Curry's father died, and the man his mother married afterwards was a drunk and abusive to both John Curry's mom and John himself. He was on his own and described as a quiet boy who was more of a follower and someone who could be easily led. Bleimeyer convinced John Curry that he too had been hexed. In June 1928, John Bleimeyer went to consult with the river witch of Marietta, Nellie Knoll, whose real name was Emma Knapp. Nellie Knoll had quite the reputation as a witch. During John Bleimeyer's 6th session with Nellie Knoll, the identity of the hexer was finally revealed. Nellie had placed a dollar bill in Bleimeyer's hand and told him to concentrate and stare at George Washington's photo. Bleimeyer did, and watched as George Washington's face transformed into the face of fellow powwower Nelson Rehmeyer. Knoll told Bleimeyer that there were only 2 ways to break the hex: take Rehmeyer's copy of The Long-Lost Friend and burn it, or to cut a lock of hair from Rehmeyer's head and burn it or bury it 8 feet underground. You'll remember that Bleimeyer worked for Rehmeyer as a child. Before we get to the rest of the story, I want to fill you in on Nelson Rehmeyer as a person, so you have a little bit of a background. Nelson Rehmeyer was born in October 1868 to Henry and Rachel Rehmeyer. The Rehmeyers were a large extended family, with many Rehmeyers settling in the area, and the area where they all lived and farmed was known as Rehmeyer's Hollow. Nelson Rehmeyer was married to his wife Alice. They married when she was 18 and he was 28. Together they had 2 daughters, Beatrice and Edna. Rehmeyer was known as a kind man who would do whatever he could to help people. He was taught powwow at a young age and had developed a reputation as an excellent powwow doctor. People lined up to be treated by him and came to the house day and night. This became too much for his wife Alice, who moved out of the house she shared with her husband and into her childhood home just over the hill with her 2 daughters. There was no animosity between the two. Alice just couldn't deal with the constant powwowing. In fact, she would still do Nelson's laundry. Nelson Rehmeyer lived alone and raised potatoes. His house was said to be sparsely furnished, and he was mislabeled as a hermit. The hermit reference wasn't accurate, as he was very friendly. He just liked staying on his farm and keeping to himself. Today we'd say he was an introvert, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, spoken by someone who is one. So John Bleimeyer believes he's been cursed, and the old river witch of Marietta reveals that Nelson Rehmeyer is the person behind the hex. To lift the hex, John Bleimeyer needs to cut a lock of hair from Nelson Rehmeyer's head and bury the hair 8 feet underground, or burn Rehmeyer's copy of The Long-Lost Friend. It's kind of interesting. Nelson Rehmeyer is the poster boy of powwowing. It's what powwowing should be. He's a really good man, wants to do everything he can to help people. And then you have the river witch of Marietta, who is pointing the finger, swearing up and down that he's the reason why Bleimeyer is hexed. She's really not the epitome of powwowing. She would be the opposite. So, just so you have an idea, this is what's going on. The bad witch is pointing a finger at the good witch. Basically what it is. Around this time, a man by the name of Milton Hess and his wife Alice had a run of bad luck. They had some chickens die, some stopped laying eggs, and the cows stopped giving milk. They were also dealing with some disagreements with neighboring family members. John Blymeyer met Hess and made him believe that he could help fix the problem, and he said it would cost $40 or $50. Hess gave him $10. John Blymeyer eventually convinced Milton Hess that he was hexed. Blymeyer said that Ida Hess, Milton's sister-in-law, who he was having property issues with, paid Nelson Rehmeyer to hex him. Blymeyer explained that he would need to get a lock of Rehmeyer's hair and bury it 8 feet underground behind the Hess chicken coop, and the hex would be lifted. Which, again, I'm going to point out, he's now telling these people, oh, I can, fix the problem. Their chickens probably died from either a fox, a hawk, or some other crazy chicken illness. Speaking as somebody who has chickens, they die. And they die for no reason that you can outwardly see. Also, they stop laying eggs for several different reasons. Like, I don't know, if the hen house is attacked by a fox and they witness other chickens being taken by a fox, it spooks them to the point that they don't lay for a little while. The chicken issue is really not very paranormal in this situation, but Blymeyer has managed to convince the Hess family that they're cursed. They've been hexed, and they've been hexed by somebody they don't even know. They've been hexed by Nelson Rehmeyer, who, surprise, isn't it interesting? That's also the person that has hexed Blymeyer and John Curry. And the same thing that is going to fix the hex for John Blymeyer, suddenly it's now incorporated into something that's going to help the Hess family. Again, how does somebody who has a limited intelligence capacity able to connive? I mean, that's what he's doing here, in my opinion, anyway. He comes across as extremely conniving to me. It's hard to believe that he has a diminished intelligence. So back to the story. On a rainy Tuesday night in November, the week of Thanksgiving, John Blymeyer and John Curry got a ride out to Nelson Rehmeyer's house from Milton Hess's oldest son, Clayton. Blymeyer and Curry first went to Nelson Rehmeyer's house, and finding no one home, they went next to Rehmeyer's wife's house just over the hill. Alice Rehmeyer told Blymeyer and Curry that Rehmeyer wasn't at her place. So the two went back to Nelson's house, and seeing a light inside, they knocked. By this time it was pretty late at night. Rehmeyer invited the two inside, where they sat up for a couple of hours making small talk. Blymeyer was too scared to reveal the true nature of his visit. Nelson Rehmeyer was a large man, at least 6 feet tall, and Blymeyer didn't think he and Curry would be able to overtake him. Eventually, Rehmeyer excused himself and went to bed, telling John Blymeyer and John Curry they could spend the night, which they did. The next morning, Rehmeyer fed the two breakfast, and they left. If you've hexed a couple of people, why do you invite them to stay in your house and feed them? So Blymeyer and Curry end up returning to the Hess farm after going to a hardware store to purchase rope. At the Hess farm, John Blymeyer asked to have Clayton Hess, the oldest son, help them get the hair from Nelson Rehmeyer, but his mother refused because he had to work. Instead, she allowed her younger son, 18-year-old Wilbert Hess, join them. Clayton Hess drove the three out to Rehmeyer's farm. It was the night of November 27th. Blymeyer knocked on Nelson's door, but no one answered. Blymeyer called out Nelson Rehmeyer's name, and Rehmeyer opened a window on the second floor to answer Blymeyer's call. Blymeyer claimed he had left something in Rehmeyer's house the day before, when he spent the night, and he wanted to come in and search for it. Nelson Rehmeyer let them in. The following information about what happened in the house was taken from Wilbert Hess's confession, printed in the paper. Once in the house, Blymeyer asked Rehmeyer if he had seen whatever the lost item was. Rehmeyer hadn't. Blymeyer began a search, pulling out the couch and looking around. Rehmeyer was standing at the kitchen table when Blymeyer grabbed him around the body and made motions for Hess to grab Rehmeyer. Hess and Curry grabbed Rehmeyer. The three men took hold and threw Rehmeyer to the ground. Blymeyer said they needed to tie his legs in order to cut his hair. Hess told Curry to tie Rehmeyer's legs. Rehmeyer asked, "What are you going to do to me?" Blymeyer told him to be quiet, that they want to do something or get something. Rehmeyer tried to get up and yelled. Then he got up and they put him back down. Blymeyer had a piece of wood and he was hitting Rehmeyer over the head. Then Curry kicked him with his foot. Then Rehmeyer got another piece of wood and told Hess to hit Rehmeyer. Hess hit him once or twice over the left ear and the side of the head. Then Blymeyer hit him over the head with a chair, and the chair broke. Blymeyer said, "Give me your money." And Rehmeyer gave Blymeyer his money, and Blymeyer put it in his jacket pocket. Rehmeyer tore Blymeyer's jacket, then Blymeyer hit Rehmeyer again. Curry went and got the other lengths of rope off the couch, and Hess took it from Curry and tied Rehmeyer's hands and told Blymeyer to cut his hair. Hess said he told Blymeyer 3 times to cut his hair. Then Blymeyer said they should put the rope around Rehmeyer's neck. Blymeyer lifted Rehmeyer's head and told Curry and Hess to put the rope under his neck. Curry put the rope under, and then Curry and Blymeyer fastened it, and then Curry pulled the rope, and Blymeyer said, "Choke him." Curry pulled the rope so tight that Hess could not hear Rehmeyer breathe anymore. Curry and Blymeyer wanted to search for the book, The Long-Lost Friend, but Hess told them not to, because Rehmeyer was dead. Blymeyer took the light and went upstairs and pulled the blinds down in the room and said, "While we're here, look for money." Blymeyer went through the drawers on the second floor and gave Hess $3 in change to put in his pockets to carry home. They went downstairs and burned Blymeyer's jacket in the stove. Hess said, "Let's go." Blymeyer decided they should light the house on fire so no one would be suspicious of them. Curry took the oil lamp and poured oil over Rehmeyer's body, and then Curry gave a match to Blymeyer. John Blymeyer lit Nelson Rehmeyer's clothes on fire, and the 3 men left and went up the hill past the barn through the woods. Blymeyer didn't think the house was burning and wanted to go back and look. Hess didn't want to, but Blymeyer insisted. They went into the corn shed because Blymeyer wanted a bag for some reason. Hess said he heard someone coming, so they left. Hess said that Rehmeyer's clothes were burning and the fire on the body flamed up 2 inches high when they had left. John Blymeyer told Wilbert Hess to lie to his mother about killing Nelson Rehmeyer, but Hess told his family what had happened. The money that was stolen was split up between the 3 men, and Hess felt that he got gypped. John Blymeyer wanted Clayton Hess, the older brother, to drive him to Nelson Rehmeyer's house on Thanksgiving to see if the house had burned, and if it hadn't, he wanted to burn it. But they didn't go. On the afternoon of Thanksgiving, a neighbor noticed Nelson Rehmeyer's animals in the barn, carrying on and eating food and water. He fed them, and began wondering where Nelson Rehmeyer was. He was told by a mailman that Rehmeyer hadn't gotten his mail, so the neighbor went and got another neighbor, and the 2 men went in the house and discovered Nelson Rehmeyer's body. The house had not burned. The men went to Rehmeyer's wife's house to tell her something had happened to her husband. It was Alice who tipped off the police about John Blymeyer and John Curry because of them showing up at her house the night before the murder, looking for Nelson. Blymeyer, Curry, and Hess ended up confessing. Blymeyer reportedly bragged that he had killed the witch who had hexed him. During the trial, the judge didn't want any mention of witchcraft or powwow mentioned, but Clayton Hess brought up witches in his testimony, and that opened the door. People testified that John Blymeyer talked of seeing goblins on a regular basis and witches chasing each other up the walls of his room. Doctors said that Blymeyer was delusional and mentally the age of an 8-year-old. Blymeyer testified at his trial and said they didn't take the lock of hair, because Rehmeyer was dead and he would be buried, so there was no need. The hex was broken. He also said that if he believed the judge had hexed him, he had the right to kill the judge and would be justified. The jury deliberated an hour and 29 minutes and found Blymeyer guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. Blymeyer said, "They went a little heavy, but I felt a lot better. I'm much happier. The spell is off me. I'm not bewitched anymore." Blymeyer and Curry both received life sentences, and Hess received a 10-year sentence. Blymeyer and Curry had their sentences commuted after serving time in Eastern State Penitentiary. Hess served his full sentence of 10 years. Curry ended up fighting in World War II and was on Eisenhower's staff and helped draft the plans for the invasion of Normandy. John Blymeyer served 23.5 years and was released in 1953. His family, after talking with him, said he was not changed, and they believed he would do it again. In fact, back in 1928, during the trial, John Blymeyer was suspected in another killing that happened the year before, in 1927. In 1927, a 16-year-old girl named Gertrude Rudy was found murdered on the railroad tracks. She had been shot with a shotgun at close range and mutilated. No one was ever charged with her murder, and it is still unsolved today. But Blymeyer's family has their suspicions. They believe completely that Blymeyer killed Gertrude. She was a constant visitor to his room at the rooming house, according to the landlord, and she called him several times on the phone. After her murder, Blymeyer's shotgun mysteriously went missing. His family believes he probably got her pregnant and killed her to hide it. And I pretty much have to agree with that assessment. Blymeyer died in 1972. As I mentioned, for me personally, he comes across as somewhat of a con man who enjoyed the act of murder. And I say that, but I do believe that he suffered from a pretty serious mental illness. A combination of illnesses, really. I don't think it's really one specific thing. And I'm really not somebody who can diagnose anybody, but he was already diagnosed as borderline personality. There was probably something else going on. He was having hallucinations. I'm assuming he was hallucinating when he saw goblins and witches chasing each other up and down his walls. But he was smart enough to get people to agree to what he was telling them, to pay him money, which went against powwowing completely. You aren't supposed to request money. You're supposed to just accept whatever they give you. And yet he is defrauding an old man of property, saying he's either got to give him $600 or sign over his farm. He's telling the Hess family, oh, it's going to cost $40 or $50 to get rid of your hex. And interestingly, the hex is the exact same hex that he has, the same person. So he's almost getting paid or requesting payment to lift his own curse. I mean, if you think about it, he's telling the Hesses, yep, Nelson cursed you. It's going to cost $40 or $50 to get rid of it. You got to get a lock of his hair and bury it behind your chicken coop. So if they pay him, he's getting paid to lift his own curse. That doesn't really sound very stupid to me. John Curry was only 14 at the time of the murder. And in my opinion, I think he was more or less an impressionable kid who just friended the wrong person. Hess is pretty much the same. He thought he was going to do something benign, help out his family, cut off a lock of hair and bury it, and that would be the end of it. He had no expectation of any kind of violence whatsoever. But even though we've got witches here, that's not the only paranormal sort of thing with this story. There are some hauntings that go on in Rehmeyer's Hollow. People have seen faces of people that have died in the hollow floating about. Cars are said to stall, and sometimes you can't get back to the main road from the same road you came in on because the roads seem to morph into a maze. Cell phones sometimes don't work. Locals say it can get strange around there, especially near the pond, where it said bodies were thrown in as though it was a gravesite. Shadowy figures are seen lurking around Nelson Rehmeyer's property when no one is there. If you throw pebbles at the Rehmeyer house, they are thrown back at you. Disembodied voices have been recorded in the woods around the house, and a black dog with red eyes roams the property. Some say the house itself is cursed, and that's why it didn't burn. But, if you remember, and the long-lost friend, it mentions that if you have a copy of that book, you can't be burned. Interesting. But supposedly Nelson Rehmeyer did not have a copy of that book. So as I mentioned, I did manage to visit the Rehmeyer house. Sadly, there were no lurking shadows or car stalling or getting lost in a crazy maze of roads. I had no issues getting there. It was very simple. I had no issues getting home. But I did end up with a couple of EVP recordings, and I'm going to share those with you now. As I mentioned, I didn't have my husband go along with me, and I gotta say, it's never dull when I do an EVP session in front of him. With this first one I'm going to play, when I played back the recording there, my husband looks at me and asks, "What was that?" And I just simply said, "It was a ghost." Like, that's what we're here for. So here is the first EVP.
Anybody here with us at the Rehmeyer house?
So that was the first one. I'm going to play it again for you. I am not sure 100% what it's saying, or if it's, it's not clear. But there's definitely responses to my question. It was totally silent. We were sitting, there's a little gravel parking area right next to the house. It's not really, it's really just a pull off. We were sitting there, parked there. It's a rural area. There were no cars on the road. Nothing was going on around us. And we weren't talking other than me asking questions. So here is that recording again.
Anybody here with us at the Rehmeyer house?
So here is the second recording that we got that was taken right after the first one.
Can you tell me your name? Was you murdered here?
So basically in that one I said, "Can you tell me your name?" There's a response, "And were you murdered here?" And there's a response. So I'm going to play that again for you as well.
Can you tell me your name? Was you murdered here?
And I have one more for you. And this one wasn't as loud. So here is the last EVP recording that I got at the Rehmeyer house.
I'm getting ready to leave. Is there anything you want to say before I go?
So I'm going to play that for you once more. There's like several quiet little things like somebody's actually talking. So let me play this one more time for you.
I'm getting ready to leave. Is there anything you want to say before I go?
I want to stress here, before we're done, that I don't think powwowing is bad. Powwowing is something that is rooted in helping people. Remember, as I mentioned, it's all about intent. And Nelson Rehmeyer was not practicing black magic. He was not an evil man. He was someone who was willing to open the door to people in the middle of the night, let them stay in his home, and cook them breakfast because he was a good person. So that's going to do it for this episode. Remember, you can find Lurk on your favorite podcast platform or at lurkpodcast.com. On the website, you can also find links to our social media, so consider giving us a like or follow. I post photos on social media that go along with the different episodes. And remember, we have merch at lurkpodcastmerch.com. I think the logo t-shirts are pretty awesome, if I say so myself. And with that, until next time, keep lurking.